address any questions that may be put in the Q&A. Perfect timing. We're now recording. So Lance, take it away.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. We are super excited to bringing you another P100 training series. It's hard to believe that we've released another P100, the 2024 P100, and hopefully most of you have the emails with all of the future sessions coming up. We have, I think, 8 or 9 of them all set up and ready to go for you, and the trainers are getting them all prepared. And then at the end, in sort of early October, we've also set up an open session. So if you have clients, other federal agencies, or contractors, A&E or construction contractors that want to know more about P100 and how to better understand, that will be an open session that we're doing for the general public. So love to get them involved and participating and checking everything out. So today, we're going to be going over some of the general requirements, some life cycle cost analysis, and BIM. Sort of a little hodgepodge, but we thought it was a pretty good opening session to get your appetite wet, get everything sort of checked out, get some of the basics down, and then some of the, I guess, the big new sections that we did add in, especially with LCCA and a lot of new information as it relates to BIM. So let's get into it. These are your presenters today. I'm Lance. Mark Cucci will come up and do the life cycle costing, and Ed Newman will do the BIM. So that's us. And then moving in, and here's what we're going to be going over, sort of the general requirements that getting to know, sort of especially as it relates to some of the new requirements in P100. If you're not aware, we started back in August of last year with getting P100 ready. We went out to all of you as well as the industry, got over 750 comments. We went through every single one of those comments and came up with recommendations, and ultimately went through 6 different reviews to finally become the version that is out and available today. So let's get into the general requirements. First of all, I want to start off, one of the things we did differently this year is we actually did some rollout dates. We recognized that when P100 makes it through issuance and we send out that email, that it's really difficult for project managers that were trying really hard to get projects out on the street to all of a sudden have to pivot and rewrite their requirements to include the new P100. So we gave a little bit of extra time for everyone to prepare for that. And so just wanted to make sure everyone was clear on that. So already starting July 1st, a lot of the smaller project work, things like the studies or a building evaluation report, O&M projects, repair and alterations, smaller versions, and task orders. If you've got a project that's hitting the street after July 1st, you are expected to be using the 2024 P100. And then come August 1st, all prospectus and all other projects like ESPC, RWAs, all of those sort of things are expected to be using P100, the 2024 version. There are an exception that I just want everyone to be clear on. If you have a project and it hasn't hit the street yet for design services or construction or design services, and a majority of your funding is from Bill or IRA, you are not required to use the 2024 version. We do ask that you review it for applicability, but it's not required. And then for clarity, because we get a lot of questions about this, if you have an existing project that's already underway, you do not have to move to the latest version. You can if you want. There are definitely some clarifications. There's also some betterments in P100 in this latest version. And you may decide that those are worthwhile to include in your project, but it's not required. So I want to make sure that everyone was up to date on that. And then this is the big deal. and want to make sure that everyone is really clear on this. P100 is mandatory. We hear lots of interesting stories from project managers about my executive said this or my so-and-so said that. It is mandatory, and we've tried very hard to be very clear about how it relates to our owned inventory. So if you're getting funding from any one of these funding sources, BA 51, 54, 55, 61, 63, 64, 80, and even externally financed projects like ESPC projects, they are all required to be meeting the requirements of the 2024 P100. So please make sure that you're following that and thinking about that. Also want to pay particular attention to BA 61 funds. Those are operating funds, and that also includes, and we added this in for clarity because we were getting lots of reports back on this particular item, O&M contracts. So if you've got an O&M contract and they're coming in to replace a pump or to take care of something else, that particular item cannot be necessarily done in kind. It has to meet the latest version of P100. And so we're getting lots of scrutiny over what we're actually installing and how it's being operated. So that's one to, I think, to pay close attention to and be aware of out there. And the other piece of this is the reimbursable work authorization. We get money from other agencies to do work inside of our own buildings, and all that work needs to be meeting P100. I know in some cases we do have some special agreements, especially when we're doing whole buildings. And so if you're in that situation, you should probably already understand what your requirements are in those particular situations. But for the most part, RWAs are required. A couple footnotes as it relates here. P100 does apply to certain BA 53 lease construction facilities. As noted in P100, a conversation between the leasing agent and the chief architect needs to happen about how P100 is going to be applied. And then a reminder that P100 is also not retroactive. So again, if you've already got a project underway, you don't have to go back, or if you're building and you're not doing anything to that building, you don't have to bring it up to the latest version, not until something is being touched. So, and one other final clarification I want to bring in here is P100 applies to the scope of the work. So if you're doing a partial renovation, a repair, something like that, it only applies to the items that you're actually touching, not to everything else around it. So just because you're replacing the pump doesn't mean that you have to bring the whole building up to the latest version. So, all right, repairs and alterations, and this sort of gets into what I was just saying. We've tried to be very clear on what a repair is and an alteration, but in both cases, P100 is required, including in-kind work. We get this term used a lot as to, oh, we didn't realize P100 was required. We were just replacing in-kind. It is. So please be aware of that and make sure that you're bringing the latest and greatest. One of the new items that we've added in this year, especially in the repair and alteration section, is the idea of abandonment. And it is, we clarified this and cleaned this up some. So abandonment is not allowed in the scoped area of the work. So if you're working in a mechanical room and you're replacing that pump, or you're getting rid of that pump, that piping in that mechanical room, which is your limit of the scope of work, would need to come out. You do not leave that in. And you also need to make sure that your design team is also doing a code review, because in some cases, certain equipment and things, I think like fire alarm systems and stuff like that, need to come out all the way to their source. So, and that's very clear in the code books as to when that's required to happen. So wanted to make sure everyone was up on that piece of it. Next item, we did some cleaning up of some definitions and added some extra requirements here. And so in P100, there's we have facility definitions in chapter 1, and there's three ones that are listed. An essential facility, which is defined by the International Building Code as that building needs to remain operational after an event. That could be a hurricane, that could be a tornado, that could be a flood, that could be a power outage, whatever. But the IBC has defined what types of buildings need to be characterized as essential, and then they have requirements as it relates to what an essential facility is and what they need to have in their operations. A critical action facility is one that the Department of Homeland Security has defined that even the slightest chance of flooding is too great. And so now that we have out new floodplain management information, we've added that as part of this overall criteria, and to help design teams better understand when there is that slight chance of flooding as it relates to the project. We have some clients that have determined that they want to be in this category. And so, but again, this is a definition that is set by DHS. And then finally, the last one in this category is mission critical. And this one is actually defined by the tenant, that if any of their operation is affected by the electrical supply going out, then there needs to be additional electrical utility and work that needs to be done. And so one of the things we added here is that we got some new information about data centers and how they relate to a mission critical facility. So there's some great new information that if you have a data center in your building, as to how to handle that and how to work on it. All right. So new section that we've added into P100, and this is required in the FAR. We're already required to be doing this from a contracting perspective. But after going to several conferences and sort of doing a decent amount of research on this, we were really surprised at how many products, building products, use child and forced labor from around the world. And the concern is that that gets out and makes its way to the front of the Washington Post. And you can certainly see, how the negative headlines could, spiral out of control at that point. And so we added a new section in P100 to really bring focus to this, and then to also lay the onus of the specifications on our design teams. They need to have a better understanding that if they're specifying a mechanical unit and it's getting its chips from certain parts of China, that those chips are likely to be made with child and forced labor. And so they need to figure out another alternative to that. Or if they're getting, bricks from certain sections of Mexico, or, there's a whole host of stuff. And there's, in P100, we list a series of tools and helpful items that they can utilize to actually figure out, okay, these are the items of concern. Be careful about this, be thinking about this, be aware of it. So, so that's a really interesting one. ASHRAE 90.1. We've got DOE has approved the 2019 version of ASHRAE 90.1, but they've set the date for approval at some time in the future. And for clarity, there's also already another version of ASHRAE 90.1 out. And so what we've done within P100 is tried to we're trying to stay away from dates because the dates are changing, and as we update, it makes it really difficult to stay on top of it. And so what we've done is we've stated that design teams have to use the latest approved by DOE, regardless of the start date listed in the federal notice that they put out. So if they've come out and said the 2019 is ready to go, then according to this version of P100, we should be using the 2019 version. If and when DOE approves the 2023 version, then we'll step up and use that version as well. So couple other items as we move into some of the changes that we've done into the appendix. We did update some of the CUI information, classified information or unclassified, to the latest in standards, including the new PBS order that came out on this particular item. And I also want to make sure that project managers take a moment to actually read through this and understand CUI and how it relates to their projects. I see a lot of projects where every single page is listed as CUI, and that is not required. And so I think it behooves us to have a better understanding of CUI and how it relates to your project, what drawings and specifications actually need to be labeled CUI, and then the requirements on you to then manage that CUI as a project manager or contracting officer. So, and then finally for me, dealing with signed, sealed, and licensed professionals. So in P100, in the appendix, we do require that the responsible design professional must sign and seal the drawing. So actually an email came up just the other day about and it may have been, I think, an electrical engineer signing off on mechanical engineering work. And in some states that is actually allowed if that electrical engineer was actively involved in the design and is willing to stake their license that the work that's done is correct and appropriate for their particular state. So something to watch out for and just be aware of. And the next bullet here really gets to the state requirements that the professional must comply with the seal, stamp, and signature requirements from the project's state, district, or territory law. So in this particular instance, we're really looking to the states who manage licensing of professionals to designate how a project in that state has to be dealt with. And so if you have to be a licensed civil engineer to sign off on the civil engineering drawings, then that's what we expect. In another state, a PE designation may be perfectly fine to sign and stamp all of the engineering drawings. So we're really just focusing on what the state requirements are in these particular aspects. So with that, see real quick if we got any questions that I can jump on.
Yes, Lance, we have two questions. Actually, a few more popped in there, but the first one deals with abandonment of a pipe. It says if a pump and if a pump is abandoned in the mechanical room and is connected to a pipe that is no longer needed, and the pipe goes outside the mechanical room, which is the area of work, does all the pipe need to be removed or just the limits of the mechanical room?
If the scope of the work is just the mechanical room, then it would stop in the mechanical room. We're not expecting you to trace that pipe all the way throughout the building, you know, undo all of those ceiling tiles or, whatever to get to that pipe wherever it may lead or go to. It's only in the scoped area of work. So,
okay,
and then Mark, if you need be, you can add to that if you want.
No, not at this time. We're running pretty short here on time.
Okay.
So Ron raised his hand. Ron, is your question in with respect to what we just discussed or a totally new question?
Actually, it is, and what we just discussed.
Great.
dealing with the licensing on designers and engineers, you have designers who do not have a license, but they can design up to 5,000 square feet. Are we going to be required to even have the projects under 5,000 square feet to be licensed and stamped off on?
So yeah, I'm going. So
do the states require it, or do the states allow it based on what
the states allow it up to 5,000 square feet?
Is that all states?
I'm not sure about all states, but the ones that I've been in do.
Okay.
No, it's not all states.
It's not all states, and regardless of what state requires, I think we're fully within our right to be able to require a licensed professional sign and stamp those documents. I think it's incumbent upon us to do that. Even though it's only 5,000 square feet, that doesn't mean there can't be significant changes to a mechanical system or electrical system or anything.
yeah, the more as I read this statement, I would sort of fall back to that same thing. So yeah, that it needs to be a responsible design professional must sign and seal. All right,
Okay.
Let's move on to.
We have two more questions.
I think maybe with time, let's hold off on those two and see if we can get to them at the end, because I know Mark needs to get going.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'm going to cover the life cycle cost analysis requirements here. Okay, so first of all, the life cycle cost analysis Appendix A6 is not new. For those of you who don't know, the Appendix A6 was released via memorandum on September 12, 2023. And the appendix identifies the documentation requirements needed to track the evaluation process, create a decision record, and validate the findings of the life cycle cost analysis. So it's very important to get these documentation so that you can validate the findings of the analysis. And with this new 2024 P100 update, the appendix has been added to the P100 appendix. Okay, tables 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, and 6.4 in the appendix identify the design alternatives, proposed systems, and baseline systems that must be included in the life cycle cost analysis for each project phase and each project delivery type. So I'll go over just an example of one of the tables next here. So yeah, this might be a little bit hard to see, but this is a sample table 6.1. And again, there's 4 tables in the appendix. And this is the table for the design bid build, design build bridging, and CMC delivery methods. So the table identifies the proposed design alternatives that must be included in the life cycle cost analysis for each project phase. So I'll just point out a couple of things here that are critical. In the preliminary concept phase, 3 distinctly different architectural design schemes must be included. During that same preliminary concept phase, for the lighting control system, the HVAC system, and the service water heating system, that is just the ASHRAE baseline system during that preliminary concept phase. So the thought is during the preliminary concept phase, you'll look at different architectural options or alternatives. And then during the next phase, the concept development phase, one of the architectural design schemes will be selected. So once an architectural design scheme is selected during that concept phase, that's when the life cycle cost analysis must include 3 building enclosure alternatives, 3 lighting control system alternatives, and 3 HVAC system alternatives. For all the project phases, the baseline system is the ASHRAE 90.1 baseline system. Just a few other things to point out. If the project scope of work is not a new building or a retrofit to an existing architectural design scheme, then the 3 proposed building enclosure systems, 3 HVAC alternatives, or 3 lighting system alternatives should be moved up to the preliminary concept phase. And then lastly, the life cycle cost analysis will be updated through all the project phases, even though they're not listed on the tables, meaning the CD 65%, CD 95, and CD final. The documents should just be updated as the design progresses to indicate any new updated information or new cost information. Okay, so what you need to know, the statement of work template should be edited to reference the P100 Appendix A6 Lifecycle Cost Analysis requirements. Currently, the statement of work templates do not reference any lifecycle analysis requirements, so it's important to edit those statement of works to appendix. Also, if the project scope is different from the Appendix A6 table 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, or 6.4, the example I just showed, if it's different than the phases shown in those tables, or your scope doesn't include all the, an architectural renovation and an HVAC system, then your statement of work should identify the design alternatives, proposed systems, and baseline systems that should be included in the life cycle cost analysis. Okay, the life cycle cost analysis should include general information, the types of decisions to be made, and the constraints. And then the common parameters of the LCCA should be provided, such as the study period, base date, discount rate, inflation, operational assumptions, and most importantly, the local utility, energy, and water cost. You need to get the rate schedules from the local utilities. That's very important so that we get an accurate cost for the energy cost for the project. The life cycle cost analysis should include a narrative of each alternative proposed system and baseline systems. The technical criteria and design features of those systems should be described. The rationale for including alternatives and proposed systems should be included, and also rationale for excluding any alternatives or proposed systems should also be part of the LCCA. And any non-monetary considerations should be included. In some cases, a selection for an alternative or system might not be related to cost. So it's very important to identify that in the analysis. How is the life cycle cost determined? The life cycle cost is the sum of the initial cost of the alternatives, the energy costs, the water costs, operation, maintenance, and repair costs, the replacement cost, minus any residual value. And all costs are converted to present values by discounting. Okay, what you need to know, the P100 appendix, and this is really what the appendix is all about. It identifies the documentation required to track the evaluation process, create a decision record, and validate the LCCA findings. We created this appendix because we were finding most life cycle cost analysis, contained a high-level summary, but did not have any of the information, the documentation needed to validate those findings. So the appendix really spells out what is needed in that analysis so you can validate the findings. A materials and equipment list must be provided for each design alternative, proposed system, and the baseline system. So this material and equipment list of the alternatives is the input for the initial cost estimate. It's the input for the energy modeling program. It's the input for the water use calculations. The operation, maintenance, and repair tasks and frequency are determined, again, from the material and equipment list. It's the input for the replacement cost estimate and the residual value estimate. An initial cost estimate must be provided for each design, alternative, proposed system, and baseline system, again, based on the material and equipment list. And the initial cost investment cost estimate must meet the P100, not P100, sorry, P120 requirements. So everyone should be used to those P120 requirements for normal project cost estimating. Energy modeling must be provided for each design alternative, proposed system, and baseline system for each combination of interdependent design alternatives. The energy modeling must be completed in accordance with ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix G, Performance Rating Method, Energy Modeling Requirements. And it's important, the Appendix G has very specific documentation requirements for the energy modeling. Again, it's critical to get that information to validate the model. And the energy model must include a summary table provided showing the net annual energy use by type and total energy use. So the energy modeling information determines the annual energy use of each alternative, and that annual energy use is entered into the life cycle cost analysis program, which determines the annual energy cost. Water use calculations must be provided for each alternative, and a table showing the water use calculations for each proposed alternative must be included as part of the life cycle cost analysis. Okay, again, what you need to know. Most life cycle cost analysis provided for GSA projects applies simple cost per unit floor area to determine operation, maintenance, and repair cost. This is the problem. Applying simple cost per unit floor area is unreliable, does not adjust the factors that affect operation, maintenance, and repair cost, and must not be used as a basis to determine operation, maintenance, and repair cost. So the appendix explains and spells out the requirements to get a more accurate operation, maintenance, repair costs. So the design alternatives, proposed systems, and baseline systems, equipment and material manufacturers' operation and maintenance manuals must be used to determine the operation and maintenance, repair task, and frequency. So once the material and equipment list is provided, then the manufacturer's operation and maintenance manuals for that equipment clearly identifies the operation and maintenance tasks and the frequencies. For example, if a chiller oil needs to be changed monthly, it will show the time frame, the task for each of those requirements. So it's important to go to that source of information to determine these costs. In addition to the operation and maintenance manuals, which identify the task and frequency, ASHRAE Applications Handbook, Chapter 38, Owning and Operating Costs, Section 3, contains factors that affect maintenance cost. And each one of these factors should be evaluated as part of the cost for the O&M task and frequency. So the quantity and type of equipment will affect the maintenance cost. The equipment location, height above the floor versus floor mounted equipment. Of course, if say, for instance, HVAC equipment is located above the ceiling, you'll need ladders, you have to remove ceilings to get to it versus HVAC equipment on the floor. So there's going to be a difference in maintenance cost there. This is a good example of the cost, per unit floor area does not address this. System runtime will affect maintenance costs. If a system runs 24 hours versus a system that just runs during the normal workday. Critical systems that must be up and running and never fail versus non-critical system. There's going to be a larger operational and maintenance cost for critical systems. System complexity. A complex system most likely will have more operation and maintenance repair costs than a non-complex system. Local conditions, a coastal environment that affects HVAC equipment, corrosion, again, will be a higher cost than a non-coastal environment. So local conditions should be considered. Geographic locations, a location that's far from maintenance contractors versus a location in a city that has many maintenance contractors. Equipment age, and also, again, available infrastructure, the available O&M contractors in the area where the project's located should be considered. So all these factors will affect costs and should be included in the analysis. Let's see, operation and maintenance repair costs must be determined from the contractor and vendor quotes provided for the OM&R list of task and frequency and the ASHRAE factor. So high level, the task and frequencies are identified, and then vendor quotes are provided for those list of tasks and frequencies, with the addition of the ASHRAE factors included in those costs. We are open to using other data sources if the AE or project team would like to consider other data sources, and those other data sources should be submitted to GSA for review. Again, it's just most importantly that these other data sources, if they're used, properly account for the task and frequencies identified for the equipment and address the ASHRAE factors affecting OM&R cost. Replacement cost estimates must be provided for each design alternative, proposed system, and baseline system with an expected life less than the LCCA study period. So if a study period is 40 years, which is typical for new buildings, if HVAC system lasts 15 years, then that equipment will have to be replaced at year 30. So if the equipment lasts longer than the study period, then the replacement cost wouldn't be included. The replacement cost estimate must meet the P100, P120 requirements. Copies of the materials and equipment manufacturer's data indicated the expected life must be provided, and then tables indicating the expected life of the equipment and materials should be included in the analysis. So it's important when we're reviewing the analysis that the correct expected life of the equipment is included in the analysis. We've seen HVAC equipment, for example, incorrectly show 20-year or 25-year life when in reality it's a 15-year life. So it's important to get the correct expected life for the equipment and materials. Residual costs, tables listing the residual value, net any disposal cost of the design alternatives, proposed system, baseline system should be included. I typically don't see residual costs included in life cycle cost analysis, but it's something that should be considered. The NIST Building Life Cycle Cost Analysis Program, BLCC program, the most recent version must be used to perform the life cycle cost analysis calculations. And then the following reports should be listed and included in the life cycle cost analysis. One of the most important ones is the BLCC input data listing. That report shows all the input to the life cycle cost analysis, and it's very important to validate those input again to make sure that the life cycle cost analysis is correct. Interpretations, the life cycle cost analysis should include narratives and tables, providing the life cycle cost analysis comparisons, a sensitivity analysis, and uncertainty assessment. And to recap, edit the statement of work to reference P100 Appendix A6, the life cycle cost analysis requirements. Again, since the template statement of works do not include a reference. If your project scope of work is different, then revise that statement of work to identify the design alternatives, proposed systems, and baseline systems that must be included in the life cycle cost analysis for each project phase. Documentation requirements identified in Appendix A6 are needed to validate the results. And then finally, operation, maintenance, repair costs must be determined by contractor vendor quotes provided for the operation, maintenance, repair list of tasks and frequencies, and also include considerations of the ASHRAE factors affecting maintenance cost. All right, I turn it over now to Edmund.
Thanks, Mark. Hello, everyone. I'm Ed Newman. I'm the GSA National BIM Program Manager. I've been in this position and worked with many of you over the last 7 years now or so, which is surprising to say. Seems like yesterday. And I'm here to talk about BIM in the new version of the P100. My microphone went on mute. I just posted, I think, in the question and answer, a little statement reminding everyone that under FAR Part 27.4 and GSA contracts, energy models and the BIM models and all the other documentation around every one of our projects is considered government property as part of the work, and these should be turned over to the GSA either on the submittal schedule or at least at closeout, and your authority comes from those statements. Don't use the space bar. There we go. So again, like the LCCA, BIM has been required by P100 since 2009. So it's not a new subject. And for those who haven't heard of BIM before, BIM is the design model from which your construction documents are derived. It's developed by your architect. It's modified during construction by the contractor, and it contains all the equipment information as well as all the envelope properties, floor plans, everything else of your building or your project is in the BIM model. P100 has also required equipment modeling to the COBE standard since 2015. So again, this is not new. This is something that's been required. And we've been working for the last several years in trying to make this as easy as possible for you to implement without having to know much about BIM modeling or anything like that yourself. So what are the BIM requirements in the P100, which have not changed, which is new and major remodeling and new construction require BIM modeling for their work. Construction sheets that you bid your project from must be derived from that BIM model, including the schedules and all the other information required to bid a project. Equipment, asset, and SDM information is entered into the model via the CDX, which is the GSA Common Data Exchange, and the COBE standard. And all of these are called out in P100 under section 1.8.3, appendix 8, A1.1, and the P100 submittal matrix for architects. And all of this is to enable facilities management to enter the parts of your building that they need to operate and maintain in the future quickly and easily into their NCMMS, their computerized maintenance system, also called Maximo for those of you who know the particular program. So what is new around P100? Well, we're just releasing a revised version of the GSA BIM, CDX, and COBE standard. These have been separate documents they're now combined into one simple document. And we've been working with the regions for the last year and a half to modify the initial standard that we developed with Region 9 to be applicable for the processes in every region. So the BIM standard is revised. That's what guides your AE and your contractor on what's in the model, what they should, how detailed, why they're doing it, all that information that goes into the model and the process by which they should be entering it is contained in the GSA BIM standard of this document. We've also revised the CDX standard after using it and testing it with multiple projects across the country in the last 4 years. And the CDX, we're modifying it. The initial version had it as an entirely set of GSA described attributes. We're returning the equipment information to the standard COBie format, which will make life easier for your AEs and their engineering staff, because they won't have to double enter information. And the SDM data in the model, which is the measurement of areas and spaces, that will be still stored in GSA specific attributes because that was never part of the COBie standard. To help you do this, we have started a new contract this year on BIM setup and support for your project. Project managers can email bimsupport@gsa.gov and give us the basic information about what your project is and what your schedule is. And you'll be contacted back with a form that lets you put in more information, and then we can start a process of consulting with you on what you need to do. You also need to be using the contract templates that are in the PM Hub, because those have all been edited to require BIM activities in specific ways from your contractors, your CMA, and your A&E firms, so that they all have priced into and are contractually required to perform BIM duties during the project. And so, again, if you've got a project, you need to be doing it in BIM. And guess what? You know, like, young people aren't really using anything else these days. So we really want to get this information in a modern format that will help us support the building in the years to come. BIM files entered into the Kahua file manager will transfer to our permanent storage known as the BDR, or Building Document Repository. I know there have been some problems with that during the setup of Kahua, but that is getting closer to really working, and we really want to get those files into Kahua so that we don't lose them in the future. Finally, there's now more than just me. Earlier this year, we hired Suzanne Manhire. She's a secondary, or second, I don't want to demote her from her equal position to me. She will help as well on BIM projects. She's out on the West Coast, actually in Arizona, but that makes her available to everyone out there at all hours, as well as myself on the East Coast. Coming soon to a system near you is the CFR BIM, which we're hoping to finally get up and running in helping to do BIM model checking during the course of your project to make sure that the data that's coming in is valid and useful. And I think that's the whole presentation. So thank you very much. Now we can have more questions.
All right. Do we want to go ahead and get started with Edmund's questions since they're fresh here at the end, and work our way backwards?
Let's do it.
All right. Have the new COBie standards been released?
Yes, they are available, and they will be placed in the ODC resources file this week.
Great. How are laser scans of existing building conditions during a project treated? Is the contractor required to turn those over at the end?
Technically, yes. Laser scans can get to be rather large. Later this year, we're hoping to have a better online storage system with the help of some Autodesk software. However, they should expect to turn those over on media that can house it, like a hard drive or whatever, during the end of the project, because yes, those are also owned by GSA, and those are part of our FAR 27.4 authority.
Great. And that was the next comment that you put in on 27.4. So moving on up to LCCA. Mark, how do LCCA requirements apply to firm fixed price design build projects where the offer has proposed based on specific system assumptions that have not been proven out with a complete design?
Whoever asked the questions, take a look at the appendix and review table 6, appendix 6.2. That's the analysis shown for the design build method. I agree it is a little bit different or strange for design build, and we try to explain it there, but I think the best thing, if you could review table A6 and then email me any comments to help explain it there.
Okay. Does Appendix A6 identify and or several objective means of evaluating service life of equipment?
Okay, yeah, Martin, no, it doesn't. The appendix refers to either industry data like ASHRAE, service life, expected life, or other manufacturer data. So the point is the life cycle cost analysis should include either reference to the ASHRAE expected service lives that are using or other industry data that identify the service life. And if the reviewer, the GSA project manager, thinks it's inappropriate, then of course that feedback should be provided to the AE providing the analysis.
Thank you. I'm not sure if the next one is still a question, but I'll go ahead and read it. I feel like you went over residual value after maybe it was asked, but it says, please explain what is residual value under LCCA.
Yeah, so that's the value of a piece of equipment. You know, if your study period, again, is 40 years, for example, if you replace equipment at year 35 and the equipment's only 5 years old, then that equipment, suppose the equipment costs $100,000, it still may have $50,000 of value after only 5 years. So that value of that equipment should be evaluated at the end of the study period.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Lance, we're moving into yours. What about stamping / signing for projects designed in-house by GSA employees for the PE stamp?
Yeah, so I think this one needs a little bit of thinking to it to fully flesh it out. But I think my first blush is that the person still doing the work would still have to meet the state's requirements. I think the next question that I would really start to bring up then is if that person were to severely mess up the design and have errors and omissions, or have a catastrophic failure, how is that handled within GSA? And you know, who's liable, those sort of things. So I don't know the answers to that question, but I think from the stamping and signing standpoint, they would still follow whatever the state requirements are.
Great, thank you. About abandoning in place, are there or should there be requirements for documenting abandoned in place pipe runs, etc.?
And actually, I'm going to, Mark or Ben, I'll sort of ask you that question, because most of the time it's dealing with a lot of your equipment and how that's handled.
Yeah, speaking from my perspective, there's also another question here, I think, about a fire alarm system. You know, just speaking to that, I would say you would demo all that cabling and conduit for the entire fire alarm system, because that would be your scope of work. You know, the mention of the mechanical pipe and the mechanical space is kind of a limited case situation, but if you're removing circuits, electrical circuits, feeders, things like that, then it should all be demoed. Therefore, there would be no documentation if for some reason that it could not be, and this is not in P100, if it could not be removed, it would be great to document that for further use.
And for mechanical, yeah, same answer. Again, Lance, I thought you covered the requirement was not to abandon anything in place. If there's a special case where it is abandoned in place, then
yeah, it's on those limited scope projects where these sort of questions are coming out of. So if you're, only doing work within the mechanical room, and yet you've got a pipe run that's leaving that mechanical room, they're not required to abandon that pipe any further than the mechanical room.
Electrically speaking, it comes to maybe PVC buried in conduit, or a duct, buried in concrete, or a duct bank. You can't necessarily abandon that, but it would be great to document that so that future projects would know what's going on there, that it has been abandoned and whatnot.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. For a whole, we talked about the whole building fire alarm. I think we took care of that. Steve Jansen says a licensed individual has to be licensed in the state, correct? And someone said correct. Okay. Yep. All right, last one here from Heather. Facility definition. So are all facilities on these three categories, one of these three categories, or is there a fourth category?
Yeah, so under those facility definitions, the essential, critical, or mission critical, you can have a building that isn't required to meet any of those requirements, or you can have a building that meets 1, 2, or all 3 of those requirements. And so it really depends on the type of facility that you're working on and how those definitions work as it relates to your particular project. Again, IBC sets out what an essential is, Department of Homeland Security sets out what critical is, and the tenant sets out what mission critical is. So you may have a particular project that has all 3 of those requirements and therefore needs some special attention as it relates to that.
Henny, you want to go? You raised your hand.
And Lance, if it's just clarified that critical action, if the facility is not designated critical action, it would be called non-critical action. And then there is a floodplain management desk guide that got issued last November that explains how to go about to get that designation. And that designation would be in coordination with the customer agency. So yes, DHS has the definitions and such, but then the customer agency, such as CBPs, they will have to go and define their facility for us. So, and we'll go over that when we get into the civil chapter later on.
And then also just for awareness, the U.S. courts have determined that all new courthouses are supposed to be critical action facilities.
Okay. I think we have one last comment here, Ed. I think you responded to the questions that came in. It appears, correct me if I'm wrong, but we do have one that says, what happens if you run into asbestos on removing piping?
We have an updated asbestos section that gives you a much better sense of what that is, and I don't know the answer to that right off the tip of my head, so I'm not the asbestos guy, but we can certainly look and get you that answer, though.
Okay. So it isn't P100. Okay.
Contact your regional industrial hygienicist team, because they will have the links to the EPA that you'll need to file some reports with.
There you go.
I did post an answer to a question about where the new BIM guide will be, and my response is, please request access to the Google shared drive that's named ODC BIM and COBE resources, BIM plus COBE really. And I've also posted the link. So if you click on that link, you can then say request access, and you'll be getting it. The new documentation will be up there later this week. We literally just received it in the last day, so we just need to make sure that everything is there before we put it out for public use.
Great. I think that takes care of them all. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.